The next day, the girls approached Mama Afiya cautiously during the midday break. She was sitting outside the staff quarters, weaving a basket under the shade of a large acacia tree. Her sharp eyes watched them as they approached. "What brings you here, little ones?" Mama Afiya asked, her voice warm but probing. Nandi stepped forward. "Mama, we need your help. We've discovered something strange about Madam Nzinga." Mama Afiya raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. Nandi quickly explained everything they had uncovered: the nighttime rituals, the journal, the glowing red flask, and the connection to the blood moon. By the time she finished, Mama Afiya's face had grown grave. "You're speaking of a blood spirit," Mama Afiya said quietly, setting her basket aside. "The Nyama Yochikondi is an ancient creature known to feed on the life force of the young. They take on human forms to blend in. If this Madam Nzinga is what you say, she is dangerous. What can we do?" Zola asked, her voice trembling. Mama Afiya leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "Blood spirits are strong, but they are not invincible. They can be weakened with sacred herbs, ones that disrupt their connection to the spirit world. And they can be bound during their rituals if caught at the right moment." "Sacred herbs?" Asha asked. "Where can we find them?" "They grow near the baobab tree in the forest," Mama Afiya said. "But the path is not safe. Spirits guard those trees fiercely." "We'll go," Nandi said firmly, looking at her friends. "We have to." Mama Afiya nodded. "Be careful. Bring the herbs back here, and I will prepare a charm for you. But remember, the blood moon is near. If you fail, the consequences will be dire." The girls exchanged nervous glances, but there was no turning back now. That evening, the girls set out toward the forest on the edge of the school grounds. The air was heavy with the scent of rain, though the sky remained clear. Nandi led the way, clutching a flashlight while her heart pounded in her chest. Behind her, Zola, Pendo, and Asha followed, their footsteps hesitant but determined. Mama Afiya's warning echoed in their minds: the sacred baobab tree was protected by spirits, and the journey would be fraught with danger. But they had no choice. Without the herbs, they had no way to fight Madam Nzinga. The forest was darker and colder than they had imagined. Shadows danced between the trees, and the usual sounds of crickets and rustling leaves were eerily absent. As they ventured deeper, the girls began to feel a strange pressure, as though the air itself were pushing against them. "There," Nandi whispered, pointing ahead. The baobab tree towered over the others, its massive trunk twisted and ancient. Its roots spread out like veins, and beneath its branches, a faint glow emanated from the ground. The girls approached cautiously, and there, growing at the base of the tree, were the sacred herbs. Their silvery leaves shimmered in the dim light, almost pulsing with energy. Just as Nandi reached for the herbs, the air grew icy. A low growl echoed through the forest. The girls froze as glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, one pair, then another, until they were surrounded. "Spirits," Zola whispered, her voice shaking. The glowing eyes belonged to shadowy figures, their forms barely visible. They moved closer, growling softly, their presence oppressive. Nandi clenched her fist. "We have to take the herbs," she said, her voice firm. "No matter what." Summoning her courage, she grabbed the plants, and the spirits surged forward. The spirits lunged as Nandi grasped the sacred herbs, their shadowy forms swirling like smoke but moving with terrifying speed. The girls screamed as the temperature around them dropped, the icy air biting into their skin. "Run!" Nandi shouted, clutching the herbs tightly. She bolted toward the path they had come from, the others following close behind. The spirits howled, their voices reverberating through the forest, shaking the leaves above. Asha tripped on an exposed root, letting out a cry as one of the spirits reached for her. its smoky tendrils wrapped around her ankle, pulling her back. "Help!" she screamed. Nandi skidded to a stop and turned back. Without thinking, she grabbed a stick from the ground and swung it at the spirit. The stick passed through the shadow, but the motion distracted the entity long enough for Zola to grab Asha's hand and pull her free. "We have to keep moving," Pendo yelled, her face pale with fear. The girls ran as fast as they could, the spirits chasing them with relentless speed. As they neared the forest edge, Mama Afiya's warning came to Nandi's mind. "Sacred herbs disrupt the spirit's connection to this world," she had said. Thinking quickly, Nandi tore a handful of the silvery leaves and threw them behind her. The spirits shrieked as the herbs scattered in the air, their forms flickering like dying flames. It gave the girls just enough time to burst out of the forest and back onto the school grounds. They collapsed on the grass, gasping for breath. The spirits did not follow. "We did it," Zola panted, clutching her chest. Nandi held up the bundle of herbs triumphantly. "We have what we need. Now, we fight." The girls returned to Mama Afiya's quarters, exhausted but triumphant. The sacred herbs shimmered faintly under the dim light of the lantern on her table. She nodded approvingly as she inspected the bundle, her hands moving with practiced precision. "You were brave to face the spirits," Mama Afiya said, her voice low. "Now, we must act quickly. The blood moon rises tomorrow night." The matron began grinding the herbs into a fine paste, mixing them with ashes from a clay pot and murmuring prayers under her breath. The air in the room grew heavy with the scent of the concoction, sharp and earthy. "These herbs will weaken her," Mama Afiya explained, handing each girl a charm made from the paste wrapped in cloth. "Carry this with you at all times. When the time comes, use this powder." She held up a small pouch filled with the paste. "Throw it on her during the ritual. It will sever her connection to the spirit world, leaving her vulnerable." "What happens if we fail?" Zola asked hesitantly. Mama Afiya's expression darkened. "If she completes the ritual, her power will grow beyond control. She will become unstoppable, and her victims will be lost forever." The room fell silent as the weight of the situation settled over them. Nandi clenched her fist. "We won't let that happen." As they left Mama Afiya's quarters, the girls gathered in their dormitory to finalize their plan. They would wait for Madame Zinga to begin the ritual and strike when she was most vulnerable. They rehearsed the steps in whispers, their nerves growing with each passing hour. When the blood moon began its ascent the next evening, the girls stood ready. They had their charms, their courage, and their resolve. Now, it was time to face Madame Zinga. The blood moon rose, casting an eerie red glow over the school grounds. The air felt thick and heavy, charged with an unnatural energy. The girls gathered near the dormitory window, clutching their charms tightly. Each of them wore an expression of determination, though fear lingered in their eyes. "This is it," Nandi whispered. "Are we ready?" Zola nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. Pendo and Asha exchanged a nervous glance but gave their assent. They knew there was no turning back now. From their vantage point, they spotted Madame Zinga making her way toward the old science wing. Her movements were deliberate, and she carried her red flask, its glow more intense than ever. The girls waited a few moments before slipping out into the shadows, following her trail. As they crept closer, the humming they had heard before grew louder. The sound was no longer soft and faint but a deep, resonant chant that seemed to vibrate in their bones. They peeked through the cracked windows of the abandoned building and saw Madame Zinga in the center of the laboratory, surrounded by symbols drawn in blood. 3 students, including the weakened Adhiambo, lay unconscious on an altar-like table. "She's starting the ritual," Nandi whispered, her voice barely audible. Madame Zinga raised her flask, chanting in a language none of them understood. The red light from the moon seemed to intensify, shining directly onto her and the altar. The girls exchanged nervous glances. "We have to act now," Nandi said, her voice firm despite the terror clawing at her. "Zola, you distract her. Asha and Pendo, get the students out. I'll use the powder." The plan was set. Stealing their nerves, they pushed open the door and stepped inside, ready to confront the spirits head-on. The door creaked loudly as the girls entered the old science wing. Madame Zinga turned sharply, her eyes glowing a fire red, and her chanting stopped. For a moment, the air felt thick with tension as she stared at them, her lips curling into a sinister smile. "You shouldn't be here," Madame Zinga said, her voice echoing unnaturally. "You have no idea what you're meddling with." Nandi stepped forward, clutching the pouch of sacred powder tightly. "We know exactly what you're doing, and we're here to stop you." Madame Zinga's laugh was chilling. "Foolish children. You think you can stop me? I've waited too long for this moment." Zola took her cue, darting toward a nearby shelf and toppling its contents to the floor. The loud crash momentarily distracted Madame Zinga, giving Asha and Pendo the chance to move toward the altar where Adhiambo and the other students lay unconscious. "Hurry!" Asha hissed, shaking Adhiambo gently. "Wake up!" Madame Zinga's attention snapped back to the girls near the altar. With a wave of her hand, the air around them grew heavy, pinning Asha and Pendo in place. "You think you can take my sacrifices?" she snarled, her voice layered with a deep, guttural tone. Zola threw another object to divert her attention, but this time, Madame Zinga raised her flask, and a wave of energy knocked her backward. Nandi seized the moment, stepping closer to the center of the room. "You've taken enough from us," Nandi shouted, flinging the sacred powder toward Madame Zinga. The powder hit her, and she screamed, clutching her chest as her form flickered. The glowing red flask dimmed momentarily. "We have to keep going," Nandi shouted, the girls' courage reigniting as they pressed their advantage. Madame Zinga's scream reverberated through the room as the sacred powder struck her. She stumbled backward, clutching the red flask, her face contorted in rage. Her glowing eyes dimmed briefly, but the power of the blood moon still coursed through her. "You dare to defy me," she hissed, her voice layered with otherworldly tones. Her form began to shift, her elegant features melting into something grotesque. Her skin darkened and cracked like old bark, and her limbs stretched unnaturally long. She was no longer human. The girls froze in terror as Madame Zinga's true form emerged, a hideous, shadowy creature with sharp claws and glowing red veins coursing through her body. "You cannot stop me," she roared. Nandi's voice broke through their fear. "We have to finish this," she yelled, grabbing another handful of the sacred powder. She threw it again, this time aiming for the altar. The powder scattered across the blood symbols, disrupting their glow. The students on the altar stirred faintly. "Pendo, Asha, get them out," Nandi commanded. Pendo and Asha shook off their fear and dragged Adhiambo and the others toward the door. Madame Zinga lunged toward them, her claws slashing through the air. Zola grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at her, buying the others precious seconds. "Go. I'll hold her off," Zola shouted, though her hands shook. Nandi circled behind Madame Zinga, clutching the pouch of powder. She remembered Mama Afiya's words, aim for her connection to the spirit world, the source of her power. Spotting the glowing red flask clutched in Madame Zinga's hand, Nandi darted forward. With all her strength, she threw the remaining powder directly at the flask. The glow immediately dimmed, and Madame Zinga shrieked in pain, her body flickering like a dying flame. "Now!" Nandi yelled. "We are breaking her hold." Madame Zinga howled as the sacred powder struck her flask, the light within it sputtering like a flame in the wind. Her body flickered, shifting between her monstrous form and her human disguise. The air grew colder, swirling with an unnatural energy, as though the building itself were reacting to her weakening state. "You will regret this," she shrieked, her voice fractured and layered with guttural tones. She raised her clawed hands, and a powerful force sent Zola flying against the wall. Nandi barely managed to stay on her feet, clutching the empty pouch. Asha and Pendo dragged Adhiambo and the other unconscious students out of the room, their faces pale with terror. "Hurry back!" Nandi shouted after them. "We need the charms." Madame Zinga turned her glowing eyes on Nandi, her claws slicing through the air as she advanced. "You think you can stop me? I am eternal." Nandi stood her ground, fear clawing at her chest. "Not anymore," she said, clutching the charm Mama Afiya had given her. She raised it high and threw it at Madame Zinga, aiming for the flask again. This time, the charm struck true, shattering the flask into pieces. The room trembled violently as Madame Zinga let out an ear-piercing scream. Red light spilled from her body, crackling like lightning as her monstrous form began to unravel. At that moment, Zola staggered to her feet, clutching the pouch of remaining powder. "Here," she shouted, tossing it to Nandi. With a deep breath, Nandi flung the last of the powder directly at the baobab symbol etched into the floor. The blood markings dissolved instantly, severing the spirit's connection to the ritual site. Madame Zinga's body convulsed, her form growing weaker by the second. She clawed at the air, her voice now a whisper. "No, you cannot win." But her energy was fading, and the power of the blood moon no longer fueled her. Madame Zinga's final scream echoed through the room as her body flickered and began to disintegrate. The red glow surrounding her shattered like glass, scattering shards of light across the room. Her monstrous form dissolved into smoke, which swirled violently before being sucked into the cracks in the floor, leaving only silence in its wake. Nandi collapsed onto her knees, her chest heaving as the weight of the moment hit her. Zola stumbled over, clutching her side where she had been thrown earlier. Is it over?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I think so," Nandi replied, though her voice wavered. The room, once charged with oppressive energy, now felt still, eerily still. The blood moon's light no longer seeped into the building, and the strange hum that had filled the air was gone. Pendo and Asha re-entered cautiously, their arms wrapped protectively around Adhiambo and the other students, who were now beginning to stir. "They are waking up," Pendo said, relief flooding her voice. Adhiambo blinked groggily, her eyes focusing on Nandi. "What happened?" she asked weakly. "You're safe now," Nandi said, helping her sit up. "It's over." The girls carefully guided the weakened students back to the dormitory, where Mama Afiya was waiting. Her sharp eyes scanned each of them, her expression softening when she saw the sacred charms they still held. "You've done well," she said, placing a hand on Nandi's shoulder. "The spirit is gone, and her hold over this place is broken." "But what about Madame Zinga?" Zola asked. Mama Afiya sighed. She was no longer human. The spirit that controlled her has been bound, but her true form will remain trapped in the earth. She will never harm another soul. As the girls looked at one another, relief washed over them. They had faced the unthinkable and won. The next morning, the school seemed brighter, as though a heavy cloud had finally lifted. The air was clear, and the students walked the grounds with newfound energy. Adhiambo and the other victims, though still weak, were recovering quickly. The strange marks on their necks had disappeared overnight, and their strength was slowly returning. Principal Otino addressed the students during assembly. She explained Madame Zinga's sudden departure as a personal emergency, leaving out the harrowing details. The school staff worked quickly to erase all traces of the abandoned science wing and the events of the blood moon. Nandi, Zola, Pendo, and Asha sat quietly in the back of the assembly, exchanging knowing glances. Though the official story glossed over the truth, the girls knew they had saved their school from a great evil. And so did Mama Afiya, who gave them a proud nod from the sidelines. Later that evening, as the girls gathered in the dormitory, they reflected on what had happened. "It feels like a dream," Zola said, staring at the faint scar on her arm from where Madam Nzinga had thrown her. But it wasn't. Nandi held the remnants of the journal in her lap, the pages now faded and illegible after the ritual had been broken. "We need to remember this," she said. "And make sure no one forgets. If a spirit like her ever tries this again, someone has to know how to stop it." The others nodded in agreement. Together, they wrote their story, carefully documenting everything they had learned about the blood spirit and how they had defeated it. They entrusted the pages to Mama Afiya, who promised to guard the knowledge for future generations. In the weeks that followed, life at Nairobi High School returned to normal. The girls returned to their studies, but they carried with them the strength and courage born from their experience. Nandi, Zola, Pendo, and Asha formed a bond that would never break, forged in the fires of their battle against the darkness. And though they never spoke openly of what had happened, they knew one thing for certain: evil could only thrive in silence. Their voices and their courage had been its undoing. Thank you so much for watching this incredible tale unfold. We truly appreciate each and every one of you who tuned in to listen. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, share, and leave us a comment below. We love hearing your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you're always the first to know when we upload new stories. There's plenty more to come, and we can't wait to share them with you. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay tuned for more amazing stories.